We are delighted to be welcoming a guest speaker this evening, David Hazony. He is an American-born author, but now lives in Jerusalem, where he has written and published widely. He has authored, edited, and translated many books and is a winner of the National Jewish Book Award. He's the founding editor of thetower.org, the former editor of Azur, Israel's leading journal of public affairs, and his essays have appeared in publications such as Commentary Magazine, The New Republic, Policy Review, and many others. He's also served as executive director of the Israel Innovation Fund and is one of the featured speakers at the Z3 conference at the Oshman Family JCC this Sunday. His new book, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People, is an unprecedented, large-scale collection of timely and provocative essays from a wide range of Jewish thought leaders that aims to start a global conversation among Jews about their future as a people. Tonight, Mr. Hazony will address the question. This is a question that I think we came up with before October 7th. But so it sounds a little different now, but his talk is Zionism relevant today? So, David, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the people who were involved in inviting me to come and organizing this, and to all of you who are here. So first of all, Shabbat Shalom. I promised in the conversations before that I'm not going to give you any baloney, because we don't have a lot of patience for that right now, right? So let's get straight to it. On the morning of October 7th, I, like so many Jerusalemites, woke up to sirens, and it's a very rare thing in Jerusalem. We usually, even in the rounds of conflict that have happened, Jerusalem is usually left out, and we huddled in our safe room, which is the girls' bedroom, tried to figure out how to close the heavy window, which we eventually did. Started calculating how far away the boom is and counting, like with lightning, where you figure out distance from the delay and all that and stuff. And then went about our day, because we had plans to drive up to Haifa to see my in-laws. And we drove, and we saw roadblocks along the way, and we started listening to the news. That was at 7:30 in the morning that the sirens went off. By 11:47, I had already sent out a, am I allowed to call it a tweet in this part of the country? I sent out a post on the social media application formerly known as Twitter. And I wrote that we don't really know what the numbers are, what the size of this thing is, but it certainly seems like something of unprecedented magnitude, an unbelievable horror, and a war that will not end quickly. Later that day, I got a text message from my son that his best friend had been killed, and that he was going to volunteer on an ambulance because he's a trained paramedic. Within 72 hours, it was clear that my first cousin's ex-girlfriend of 14 years had been abducted. My wife's second cousins had 2 murders and 1 abduction. And just 2 days ago, just to give you a sense that this is ongoing for most Israelis, just 2 days ago, some very good friends of ours at our shul learned that their first cousin, the wife's first cousin, had fallen in battle in Gaza. This is the story of Israelis right now. It's not that we know somebody. It's that we know a lot of somebodies. And it touches every single Israeli from multiple directions, not all at the same time, so it's day after day after day of horrifying news. Another thing that happened within those first couple of days was that 5 of my children were suddenly in uniform. and they still are. They serve in different units. I have one who never answers my text messages because even in regular times, he never answers my text messages. I have two who are telling me, I love you, but I'm busy. And I have two more who are asking me to get them an iPhone of different colors and to buy things for them while I'm in America, which gives you a sense of the difference of the experiences depending on what units you're in and how, what kind of deployment you have. In the midst of this horror, just a few things, just to give you a flavor of what we experienced, right? You're in incredible shock, but you have to focus, and one of the ways to escape the shock is to focus on the most pragmatic things, right? You have to pick up your kids, basic things have to happen. You have responsibilities. I had a meeting in my schedule for the next morning, for the Sunday morning, with a senior diplomat who's a native English speaker, and she had we had a meeting set up. I had never met her before. I was had been looking forward to it. And she texted me and said, I can't do this meeting. I have to go to the Knesset. How do we do this? Those are her words. How? The answer, of course, as anybody who's gone through some awful, awful trauma, is that you do this by putting one foot in front of the other. And you do it because you simply have no alternative. Something else that happened after about 3 days was that the moment the terrorists were no longer in our country, and it took a couple of days to be sure of that, the entire country shifted from one of absolute horror and panic to, on the one hand, starting to get all the stories coming in and therefore deepening grief and shock, but on the other hand, an absolute and total, instant, full-blown mobilization. And mobilization was not simply having 360,000 of us called up into the military. Mobilization was nationwide, helping victims and their families, helping evacuees, of whom there are more than 100,000, helping each other in every conceivable way, and dropping everything that had divided us before. Not only was judicial reform simply forgotten, not only was the absolute refusal to make a government with Netanyahu dropped and a unity government was formed, but thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews, including ultra-Orthodox women, were volunteering for the IDF. And then, one of the things I had to deal with, one of the pragmatic things I wanted to focus on to escape the horror, was this book launch. Now it is the nightmare of every author to work on a book for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, only to have the launch completely thrown off by completely earth-shattering historical events. And my assumption was, like any other author with a book, okay, I guess that's that. I guess I'm not going to the States. And the 10 to 15 events, I can't even count them anymore, planned would all be canceled or postponed indefinitely. And the reason I'm telling you this in part is because I need to explain why I'm here and not there. This project, as you heard, is not simply any book, but it's really the first time that I can think of that anybody has tried to put the entire Jewish people into a single volume with all of their disagreements and with all their radically different approaches, and to ask, we have ended up with 65 authors, and we're talking about ultra-Orthodox to secular and left to right politically, and Israelis and Americans and other diasporas and younger influencers and older writers, and put it all together in one place. I don't know, since the Talmud, if you can think of anything quite like that. And all of a sudden, the event hosts, the venues, a big full-day event in Philadelphia with 30 speakers from inside the book. Ended up being 25, but still 25 is a lot. A big event on the Upper East Side of Manhattan at the Stryker Center, which some of you may have seen online. I heard rumors that at least one of you have seen it, saw it online, because it happened just 2 nights ago. Actually, I have no idea what day it is, but it's probably Shabbat. That was a Thursday, so I'll leave it to someone else to do the math. Another event in New York City, an event in New Jersey, the Z3 conference. Every single one said, we're not canceling. We want to do this. We need this. So from my internal Israeli perspective, it was a little difficult for me to know what to make of it, but I said, okay, if everybody tells me they need it, I'm going. And when I landed, I found that the trauma that American Jewry was facing was not identical to the trauma of Israelis. In some ways it was less, and in some ways it was more. It was I don't want to say it was radically different. It wasn't radically different. Everybody, so many Jews in America have direct connections, have been there, have family there, or friends, excuse me. And so much of it was the same, but some of it was different. For example, I heard the phrase in Philadelphia at the full-day conference, I heard the phrase loneliness and fear a lot. A lot of loneliness and fear. And Israelis felt fear before they switched to we're at war mode, and we know exactly what that means, so at least there's some control over the mental framework. But loneliness we haven't felt. I'll tell you something we did feel, though, and this was really interesting. I got to Philadelphia, and I went to the hotel room, and I did it. My first night was in Boston, right by Faneuil Hall, and like the old State House, and then I got on a plane and went to Philadelphia, and out my window is Independence Hall. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if there's a message here. And then I got into the hotel room, and I turned on cable television, and suddenly I'm struck by the same stories that I had been drowning in for 2 weeks inside of Israel were being shown on all 3 cable networks nonstop. But I noticed one difference, which is that in Israel, about 25%, horrors, right? Just horrible, horrible, horrible stories, the brutality and the suffering and the uncertainty and the hostages, just on and on and on and on. But in Israel, about a quarter of the stories were also about heroism, about a bus driver who had gone back and forth inside the music festival in the middle of everything while terrorists are running around just to save as many people as he could. About the woman who somehow managed to there were terrorists in her house and managed to keep them at bay by offering them like milk and cookies or something for just long enough till the army came and saved her. About the grandfather in Tel Aviv who got a text message from his son with his grandchildren in a safe room in one of these kibbutzim, who grabbed a gun, and drove down there and led the charge to free his own children and own family. And we got these stories too. And the fact of the matter is that if you ask me what is it that created or that kept Israelis strong in this moment of absolute calamity, I would have to say that it's my kids and all of the soldiers, and to hear them talk. There was an interview on Channel 12 of 4 commanders of the Egoz Special Forces Commando Unit who fought on that first day. And they said, we had to step over the injured body of our own commander who was made sure he was being treated. He was on a stretcher. We had to step over him in order to charge the town, because the most important thing to us was that if the terrorists met anybody, it would be us and not civilians. And so they asked the officers, what can Israel do for you? What can the country do for you? And they said the most important thing is to stay united. stay united behind us. Keeps us strong. This is the soldiers telling us how we can keep them strong while they're keeping us strong. And they said, what do you imagine for the future? And one of them said, I see all these burnt out kibbutzim, and I see them rebuilt. I see them prospering more than ever. And that's what we're fighting for. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if the diaspora were to mobilize and to unify to that same extent? And to be quite honest, in the last 2 weeks since I've been here, I've seen a lot of mobilization. It's really, really quite impressive. But there's still so many Jews who are lonely and afraid. But there's one thing that I really feel a need to say. And I don't know if this answers the question about is Zionism still relevant. I'm sure it does. And I'm sure that you will all see that it does. This is not just a war about Israel. Okay, the storekeeper in Istanbul that put up a sign, "No Jews allowed," in the middle of demonstrations, wasn't talking about Israel. The demonstrators who put a picture of a garbage can with a Star of David in it that says, "Clean up the world," is not talking about Israel. Even the demonstrators in Brooklyn who said, "We don't want no Zionists here," they weren't talking about Israel either. They were talking about Jews. And when Hamas, in its charter, Article 7, quotes an ancient Muslim text saying, "We will make war with the Jews who will hide behind stones and trees, and the stones and trees will call out, 'O Muslim, here are the Jews.'" They weren't talking about Israel either. This is not me giving good news, but the truth is, the entire Jewish people is the subject of this war. But I call it a war and not a pogrom for a reason. Because a lot of people are using the word pogrom. Pogrom, to me, and probably to a lot of you, says helplessness. It says there's nothing we can do but keep our heads down and just wait for the storm to pass. And I think that's wrong. I think it's inaccurate. I think the Jewish people today, its resources, its creativity, its boldness, its youth, is potentially more powerful than at any point in its history. And in my mind, the correct response is to suit up and get ready for battle. Now, what does that mean? Of course, that means many, many things, right? I'm not saying, well, it means different things in different communities. It means, first of all, understanding that every Jewish community, no matter how isolated, is an outpost of our Jewish army and needs to be protected and needs to be safeguarded. And it doesn't mean isolation and sadness and fear, and it also doesn't mean rage, because that's not how generals think. Generals don't fight wars through rage. They fight wars through strategy and mapping out and intelligence gathering and communication and planning and figuring out where is the enemy, who is the enemy, what are they up to, and how can we take the fight to them. I really do believe that we are an amazing, amazing people, and that our enemies around the world are not really prepared for what we are capable of delivering to them. But just as Israel's operational goals are to dismantle Hamas, and as defined very specifically as to eliminate their ability to wage a war and eliminate their ability to govern, because if we don't do that, then nobody's ever going to move back into the kibbutzim in the south, period. It's not negotiable. But so too should we have as our operational goals, not the elimination of anti-Semitism, right? That's like eliminating racism. It's a fantasy. But the radical disempowerment and disincentivization of the anti-Semitic hordes that we see building today. And I believe it's possible. I believe it's doable. So if I can leave you with a blessing on this, in these difficult times, is that we will not fear, but have the strength to come together, to think creatively, to realize, and this is also an important point, mobilization isn't just about Israel. It's important, it's crucial, it's wonderful. Right now it's an emergency. But we need to stay mobilized and invest in the diaspora too. And that's education, and that's rethinking an awful lot of things that we may have gotten wrong over the decades. But if I can offer you a blessing, it's that we'll have the strength, the creativity, the boldness to get together, to take the fight to the enemy, and to reestablish a safe, creative, and prosperous diaspora all around the world. So thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom. Just one last little thing. This is the book I was talking about. And there are flyers outside if you want to remember what it's called later on. Thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.